So I'm Joe Payne, and I'm going to start talking about multiple model estimation for hybrid systems, which hopefully I'll explain all of that well enough that we all get there. It's a pretty mathy thing, but I'm going to do my best to have essentially no equations or algorithms written in my slides, because it's a lot easier to follow that way. So as a little bit of background, dynamics are varying a lot by contact mode. So whether a foot is in contact with the ground or not, it's determining whether you can exert a lot of force or no force whatsoever. And having issues with whether you know you're in contact or not can cause problems with being able to accomplish your tasks. So basically, I want to have better estimation of contact state and full body estimation. Hybrid systems is a way to represent these sorts of contact systems. So essentially, a hybrid system is where for each contact mode, so on the left you could say a foot is not on the ground, and on the right you could say that foot is on the ground. They'll each have their own dynamics that they'll flow through. So in each of these modes, sort of these gray lines and the black line would represent how you'd flow through those dynamics. And then some guard set, so in the case of a legged robot, that would be your foot hitting the ground. And then some reset map associated with those guards. So in that case, foot hitting the ground stops moving in the direction of the ground. So that's how we can represent legged robots as hybrid systems. And so now kind of skipping over some stuff, there's this really cool thing called the saltation matrix, which I talked about at length last year. If you're interested in learning more about that, this QR code, which is also on my last slide, will take you to this awesome tutorial paper that we just finished writing, and it's up on archive now, that explains how you get to the saltation matrix and a bunch of different ways that is really cool and useful. But for what we care about, you can use the saltation matrix in sort of updating covariances through these hybrid events. So here we can kind of look at it as the analog to the A matrix, like linearized dynamics in a continuous domain for the instant you're going through a hybrid transition. And you can pre and post multiply your covariance before transitioning by this saltation matrix to get your covariance after transitioning. So in the past, we've applied this to Kalman filtering, which seems pretty straightforward. Once you reach that guard condition, you can use this matrix to update your covariance estimates. You would also use a reset map to update your means. And also, I've extended this to uncertain guards. So cases where you might not know how tall the ground is, those sorts of things. You don't know exactly when your guard condition would be met. So one of the things that I'm now interested in is estimating these modes. So if you just do what I was talking about before with Kalman filtering, you'll end up estimating that you're always in one mode, even if almost half of your belief has transitioned to another mode. And that seems pretty non-physical and doesn't really make sense. Also, just as a brief background, this is just kind of like a one-dimensional bouncing ball with the y-axis being, or the x-axis being height and the y-axis being velocity. So that's what we're looking at there. And what I want to use is multiple model estimation, which is holding belief in each of these modes at all times. So what that's going to look like is essentially I'll have some mean and covariance in each of these hybrid modes at all times. And to exchange probabilities and information between these, in a process update, you would look at how much of your belief has crossed that guard. Which this is something that I'm still working on figuring out is the best way. 1 minute? 2 minutes, cool. Figuring out what's the best way to go about this. So what I'm thinking right now is just sort of linearize your guard and then project your covariances just into the one dimension normal to the guard, and then you can just look at a cumulative distribution function to figure out how much to transition. There's debate about how that should be done exactly. Love to talk about it, but not right now. And so after you've figured out how much is crossed, you can then use that reset map and this saltation matrix to update your covariance and pass it into another mode, and then just do a weighted update between what was already there and what you've moved there to come up with a new estimate. So that's really what I'm working on here. There's a few other implementation details I'm trying to work out. But yeah, so thanks. Let's talk estimation. And here's this awesome saltation matrix tutorial that you should totally check out if any of this sounded even a tiny bit interesting. Yeah, and there's some contact info if you want to bother me about this. My poster was yesterday, so you don't really have an opportunity to do that other than just cornering me now. Yeah, thanks.
Can you talk about the consequences of holding these two beliefs in terms of what you might choose to do afterwards?
Yeah.
Are there perhaps different consequences for the two?
Yeah, so typically what is done in the traditional algorithm not adapted to this sort of hybrid system is you would just take the one that has a higher belief. So you're representing like, oh, I'm 50% sure I'm in this mode, I'm 50% sure I'm in this mode, or 70-30 or whatever. Take the one that you have higher belief in and just use that. But I think something that could be interesting from doing it this way is rather than just doing that, take some sort of sense of, if it's in this middle range where I'm not sure, I should really be more cautious with how I'm taking control actions because I'm not sure what's going on. Yeah, that's sort of where I'm thinking it might be useful. Also, I think because you're holding belief in both modes, it should be more resilient to if you have like one measurement update or one process update that would make you transition when you shouldn't have, that sort of thing. So it should just give better results, even if you do just do the select whichever one has higher belief. What's up?
Kind of in the same vein as that question.
Yep.
When you're running these, do you take any history into account? Like, do you remember what has happened over
Yeah,
the last
I
X
probably
number of
should have done a
stages?
little bit more explaining because I'm more focused on what's different from one that is not involving guards and stuff. But basically, you're maintaining some belief as to what ratio you think is in each of these modes. And then one way you're doing it is checking those guard crossings and whatever percentage crossed, you would transition. And that helps you sort of exchange weights between them. And then the other way is when you get a measurement, you look at the residuals between each of the modes and use that to reweight them. Yeah.
At the end of the day, you're going to apply one control.
Yes.
So is it going to be a mix between the two controls from the two different sides of the guard?
Yeah, so I think for one, I do believe that even if you're just taking the higher probability one, you should end up with a better estimate than if you were just using one Kalman filter. And also, I think in the end you will end up doing something like just taking the higher one, or if you are in a situation where you can be cautious, then you would use a different controller. Like maybe you could look at something like information seeking control, like trying to make sure that you're in a mode, something like that, if you're pretty uncertain about which mode you're in.
What if you want to just accelerate your transition through the guard?
That would be what information seeking control would end up with, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Cool, should we let him go?